Off we go. Max Presneill, welcome to Come In, We're Open. First question. What is social practice?
Okay, so we'll start off with the impossible question. I have no idea. This is one of those things. All of the potential discussion that we might have flounders away if we don't have any agreement of what social practice is, and it is one of those areas, as we've talked about before, which has so many different pseudonyms and ways of describing some practices that are quite divergent at times, and that make it nearly impossible to talk about it. In the same sense as talking about postmodernism, one has the same trouble because it all depends on what version of postmodernism one is positioning oneself in alignment to or against.
Could you give me an example of some of those synonyms and maybe some characteristics that you see of the projects that come under that umbrella?
Well, relational aesthetics is the one I think it gets convoluted in some ways up with a number of other terms. I think one of my problem as such is in trying to stay clear of using terms without any meaning, essentially, and any of these terms lack a clarity which allows for critical thinking, in my opinion, because in the same sense as if one says spiritual, if we're all talking about different things, then we're not talking about anything. And I think it's important to recognise that right from the beginning. The other thing is, if we take painting, 90% of painting, and I'm being generous, is rubbish. 90%, I'm gathering, of social practice is rubbish. The trouble is, at the moment, is the field isn't very big, and there are, if the expectation of what it might be is seen through bad examples, I guess, it hinders that the ability of a more critical kind of line being taken about its success and its relationships to the real world, etc., etc. The trouble is, of course, it uses theory to isolate itself from criticism too often because it is structured, theoretically structured, often quite elegantly, as if that's enough to compensate for either bad outcomes or inefficient practices as art in some ways. And certainly a bigger question, of course, is how is it connected to art, which I am unconvinced by.
You mentioned relational aesthetics, and Borio says something really interesting in it when he identifies what I think is a key distinction between these emerging social-based practices and more traditional practice. And he describes traditional practice as the making of meaning from an individual interiority, whereas the relational aesthetics that he's describing are creating meaning collectively. There's no one individual externalizing their interiority.
Yeah, I mean, that's fairly good grouping. The problem becomes is what part of this becomes art and which parts are simply not art. The claim that all aspects of a behaviour, because one claims they're art, doesn't make it so. Certainly doesn't make it good art. And what my problem lies, I have more difficulty because some things seem to me to be cut-rate sociology and based far too much around funding paradigms and instructions and directions than they do about how these things might be interpreted as art. In some sense, I have no problem about them being group activities or collaborative activities rather than the individual. I have no problems with that, but I do have a problem with the expectation that having anybody sitting around for a dinner party constitutes art because I say it does. A dinner party is a dinner party, or to call it art is pretentious bullshit.
I'm engaged in this field because I perceive art to be a tool for something, a tool for change in particular.
Well, I guess at some point, I mean, I don't disagree that change could possibly be an ideal in individual practice as much as in a group setting. And I do think that it's about this, it's essentially about asking questions and questioning things, not necessarily with an answer. It's just that they are provisional solutions or thoughts as one goes along. And if they are dedicated towards some kind of political outcome, fine. I don't think there's much of an argument there. My biggest objections always lie in, one is the state of the process itself and how this activity is being engaged, who, with, where, of being big questions, because I do think that is highly problematic. And what are the long-term outcomes from those if the expectation is that they should have them? Is having a show in a gallery ever going to be as successful as throwing Molotov cocktails?
Are Molotov cocktails ever as successful as gathering people together in
That's how beautifully they're made.
For conversation? Sorry?
That's how beautifully they're made.
And you've got two extremes there. And I think what many social practitioners are trying to do, because they are artists whose power, if you like, is in the art world. It comes from using the techniques and strategies of the art world. They're trying to move from between the white cube and the world of greater direct action, whether that's political direct action or developing new ways. And I think that's really challenging, and all of the questions that you're raising are tripping us all up. We have to keep addressing this.
Well, the way you speak about it is typical. It's very grounded in a conceptual positioning or at least a theoretical positioning, which makes it sound very useful in some ways and valuable, etc. My problem is in how it manifests itself, where, who, by, who to, and the realities of it. So it's fine having a set of ideals, but if the ideals are fundamentally political, there are more efficient things to be doing than showing it in any sense in any galleries, speaking to the converted too often. And then if one is going to be moving those things out to the public realm, why is it anything to do with art rather than just activism?